From Anshei Sphard-Beth Emeth congregation, it's time to take 10 minutes for Torah with Rabbi Joel Finkelstein.
Welcome to our discussion of Parshat Kedoshim, Good Government. This week's Parsha, Achrimot Kedoshim, really if you think about it, they both speak of the nation. The nation is atoned. The nation shouldn't do immorality, otherwise the nation will be lost from the land of Israel. And the nation is all gathered together, b'hakel, one communal reading, where to learn these important halachot of being a holy nation and the various laws that pertain to loving your neighbor as yourself and the like. If you look at the laws, though, sometimes it's hard to determine exactly what is the nature of the laws in Parshat Kedoshim. They're clearly very important laws, parallel perhaps to the Ten Commandments, as has been pointed out, but what else is special about them? So comes the Hemek Davra, the Netziv, Natali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, in the 19th century, and he notices that, all governments set up a government of the people, for the people, hopefully, and they always want to have two things, he says. They want to have shalom hamdina, they want to have sort of peace and harmony within the community, and they want to have the welfare of the people, the parnasa, the income, the economics of the people. They want that to be successful. So the flourishing of the people and also their relation one to another. And he says that therefore this parsha, Kedoshim, actually is divided between those sections that are designed to bring peace and harmony among people, and secondly, those that are meant to develop the prosperity. We're not going to talk about the prosperity. That's from starting with the planting of the trees later on in the middle of the chapter. But we'll talk about the first half of chapter 19 in Parshat Kedoshim, in Vayikra, in Leviticus. So he says, number one, first law is that you should honor your parents and keep the Shabbos. He says Shabbos, all countries have days of, gathering people together. We have the Shabbos. And on Shabbos and Yantiv, which is included in type of Shabbos, he says, Yantiv, the whole idea is Simchas Moreus. We know that, let's say when God forbid someone's in mourning, they can't get together with other friends to eat, because that's what it means to have good socialization. And that's what Yantiv is for. Yantiv is for socialization with friends, family, the poor, the widow, the orphan, and bringing people together. And Shabbos as well. So, in that sense, Shabbos is designed to unite the nation. Then it says that you shouldn't turn to other gods and make molten gods and masks and all that. Why? Because others have idols which also help bring people together. We should go to the Beit HaMikdash, not anyone else. Our peace should be dedicated to God. Then it talks about the shlamim, the peace offering, which he interprets that it's also meant to bring peace. Why? It brings peace not only that everyone gets a part of the animal, the one who brings it gets to eat some, the Kohanim get to eat some, and the altar takes some as well, as for God, so to speak. But also it brings peace between us down here and God above. If there was any rupture between our relationship with God, this tries to bring the peace between those here and those above. Clearly, the notion of giving the alms to the poor, leaving some gleanings, clearly brings the Jews together. Clearly, not stealing and not cheating and not lying and not swearing falsely. All these are good things. Not cheating, not delaying the payment of your workers. Clearly, all these things help the nation. But he says very specifically. He says in verse 12. Don't take my name, don't swear falsely in my name, and you will violate, you will defile the name of God. He says, you yourself will be mitchalel. The person himself who engages in the stealing and the cheating and the lying and the false oaths, he removes himself from the Tzelem Elokim. The last thing we want in our community is people not to be people, not to have the image of God. And then you're just like an animal if you don't have this, and it causes great strife. And the whole point here is the peace of the nation and the country. Then he mentions not to curse those who are deaf. The rabbis interpret that it means you shouldn't talk about others when they're not listening, because when someone's talking about you and you're not there, you're sort of deaf to what they're saying. can't hear it. So he says this is also important for peace, for people to treat each other properly. He says you have to be machshiv, you have to consider the other, you have to consider everyone important. And he says that's what the Ravad says, that the Sifra says, that Ben Azai says, it says in the Midrash, that what does it mean that the greatest principle in the Torah is not just love your neighbor as yourself here in chapter 19, verse 18, but rather the loving your neighbor as yourself. That's not what the most important principle is that we are made in the Tzelem Elokim and the image of God. And he says something very fascinating. He says, anyone who makes light of someone else is making light of God, as the Midrash says. And also, he says, if you don't see Tzelem Elokim, the image of God in others, if you treat others lightly and talk slanderously against them or make fun of the deaf person or any of the disabled, then you yourself, you don't have Tzelem Elokim. You failed to reach the potential of the Tzelem Elokim, the image of God, which should be all about being like God, being merciful and kind. So that's what this chapter is all about. It's about having, what does it mean, holiness? To have the image of God in you and to therefore bring peace in your community, like any good government is trying to do. And he says, you should, then it goes on to say that you shouldn't do any injustice, because again, whenever there's truth, there is peace, and the American way, and things work out beautifully. And whenever you treat people justly in court, don't treat the rich or the poor any differently, there is peace. It brings to peace. Of course, then it goes on, love your neighbor as yourself. Clearly that's for the peace of the nation, for the Tzelem Elokim, for the image of God in the nation, no question about it. But he says also, even the laws of shatnez, it says that you shouldn't wear shatnez, shouldn't wear linen and wool, you shouldn't have a mixed breeding of animals, and you shouldn't plant the seeds helter-skelter, just put a bunch of seeds of all different types together. You should plant things separately, especially the grapes with other things should not be mixed together. What does this mean? It's again, in order to have peace, you have to have order. There's the animal kingdom, it's a plant kingdom, it's a human kingdom. You don't mix linen and wool from the flax from the plant kingdom, wool from the animal kingdom. Although there are other mixtures that are permitted, somehow this is emblematic of the idea we want to have seder, we want to have sidur ruchani, a spiritual order in the country, and therefore that will help bring peace as well. So this is how very unusual interpretations that the Netziv made to show that just like the Germans, the French, the British, the Americans trying to make laws that bring about good governance and truth and justice in the American way, so too the laws here in this chapter, they're all about the Gufei Torah, the heartland of the Torah is right here in Parshat Kedoshim, chapter 19 of Leviticus, of Vayikra, of Torah Kohanim. Why? Because it brings out the peace among people, how to help people have peace and get along, and also how to help them flourish, survive, and thrive. That's the second half of the Parsha as well. But more broadly speaking, all these Parshiot, perhaps the whole book, is all about forming a nation that brings offerings for its sins, a nation that has to try to maintain morality, and a nation that tries to be cohesive, have shalom, peace among friends and neighbors, get people together for holy purposes and convocations, and ultimately to respect the Tzelem Elokim, and respect the image of God that is in everyone. If we don't respect the image of God in everyone, then no one has image of God. Then we ourselves have failed to have the image of God. That God, if you're in the image of God, you appreciate every single human being. You should love your neighbor as yourself. This is the amazing Parsha of Kedoshim at the heart of the book of Vayikra, telling us how we can be a holy nation and have good governance. Thanks to each one of you for joining us here at the Anshei Sphard-Beth Emeth congregation here in Memphis, Tennessee. Join us each week for a discussion of the Parsha and the holidays. And thanks to Jason Lefkowitz, our producer. Thank you.
This has been 10 Minutes for Torah with Rabbi Joel Finkelstein. To learn more, visit asb.org.